Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending our December 2024 professional development. My name is Brianna Belfontaine-Krupski. I am the Civics Teacher Leader Fellow with the the Maine Department of Education, Office of Teaching and Learning. And I am this year up in that office doing some work with the Office of Teaching and Learning in order to kind of think about new resources and things like that to engage for civics educational classrooms. And given just the time of year and everything, I figured we would kind of keep things simple for our offering for December and talk about something that might be a nice way to engage some students into some conversations about certain aspects with various different civics topics, whether it be, tomorrow, if you're thinking like, oh, what am I going to do on the last day before break? Or maybe when we come back, when we hear about some new Senate hearings for cabinet confirmations or something to do with the inauguration that's coming up when we swear in a new congressional session and also a new president into office. So, just wanted to kind of have a conversation about structured academic controversies, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, but I did want to kind of just give an overview of what they are and share with you all some examples of where you can find some resources and tips on this teaching tool. It's kind of structured academic controversy is kind of a way to set up your classroom activity to engage in some contentious conversations. And as we know, as civics teachers, there's a lot of topics out there that can be considered contentious. So, with that being said, if you have any thoughts on any of the resources shared today, they will be up on the Padlet for the civics resources that are available on the Teaching and Learning website. They are also available at the end. I'll flash up my QR code for that and also through our newsletter if you are subscribed there. So I do just want to say it first, just as once again, all of these presentations that myself and the other fellows share are not an endorsement by the DOE. They're just resources for you to access. Okay. So topics today that I'm just gonna chat about with you all in hopes that you will find some of these samples helpful for you in your classroom at some point in time this year if you choose to use it. First of all, what is a structured academic controversy? What are some examples of structured academic controversies? And then I'll share some feedback with you all from my own students and or show you a couple ways in which you can design your own. Okay. All right. So first things first, what is a structured academic controversy? Okay. If you are unfamiliar with this type of format for students to use and kind of to structure a lesson, more or less, an activity around a topic, it's long story short. I know a particular author, Diana Hess, who I know is pretty normal name in the educational world. So she did some work. I don't know the exact time, but I want to say it's within the last decade or so, on the concept of structured academic controversies, along the lines too with just the concept of bringing controversial topics into the classroom. A lot of times during the field of education, we oftentimes talk about, we kind of might need to avoid talking about controversial topics, but oftentimes they're the ones that really engage students too, and kids come in with some of these controversial topics that they want to talk about. So, what are some ways that we can structure talking about contentious topics, but do so in a way that fosters a lot of critical thinking, fosters listening skills, right? Listening to multiple viewpoints. And so there's this format called a SAC. It's also heard of it called a structured academic debate. I think they're both very similar, but ideally they are a format that's organized in such a structure that really tries to get students to think critically. It does require a lot more active listening. It does require students to kind of take notes and listen to their speaking partner, and also forces them to kind of summarize the information that they're listening to as their partners are speaking about the issues. I really like structured academic controversies. I've used them quite a few times over my time as a teacher. in my classes. I am at the high school level, though there's a lot of examples in this book too about um, middle school level as well. So don't think that maybe just if you're not a high school teacher, I'm pretty sure you can still use some of these examples in here. And at the end, I'll share a couple of ways I think even elementary classrooms could use these as well. Um, but long story short, I like them because they frame active discussion and do kind of force students to think critically on certain types of topics. And it does take away, it still makes talking about some of these tougher topics in our classrooms doable. It makes them exciting, but it kind of takes away a little bit of the edge because it is very structured in its format. So, some examples of some structured academic controversies. I have a bunch of different links here for you that I'm going to show you in a moment. I also have a blank template. The templates and the links that I have in this info session today are also going to be linked in on the Civics Padlet from the DOE as well. So if you can't necessarily follow them per se, and when we upload this video too onto the DOE YouTube, I'll put the links for them in the description about the video as well. So they'll be there for you to access at some point. So some various different examples. Obviously, if you are interested, if you don't have this controversy in the classroom, really great source. I think if you are somebody that does want to try to find a way to get your kids thinking about these topics away from just like arguing with each other, right? Like arguing's fun, right? It can be fun for teenagers and younger students, but we want to try to do so with more of a debate style, a discussion, right? Fostering that civil discourse. If you've been following some of my newsletters, you know, like a lot of the resources I share, something that I'm just personally passionate about is getting kids to really sit down and have a conversation about different ideas. This is a way to do that, this structured academic controversy concept. Long story short, ideally you split your class into pairings and you'll have each pair usually will be working on the same topic in the class instruction, but they're going to be working on gathering evidence for two different viewpoints on a particular issue. They're going to research those viewpoints on the particular issue, or maybe use some provided information from a particular source or two that the teacher or instructor gathers. They're going to go through this process of presenting their statements, their evidence, listening to the statements and evidence presented, note taking, summarizing what they hear from their partner, and then repeating the process with the opposite side. After that process is done, you kind of abandon the format and have a more conversational style aspect to think about, all right, what did we agree with? What did we disagree with? Can we build some consensus on this issue? I go back for one more. So I do have a kind of a blank template that I used myself. You could feel free to take this template at some point. The idea is the structured academic controversy or structured academic debate ends up being more like a discussion, right? It really gets at that true concept of having some civil discourse on a tough topic. That might not necessarily, be easy to talk about otherwise, right? It could invite some stronger debate, maybe some lack of clarity. So this is going to be a way to help students find that clarity and have it be significantly more structured than just having students be like, all right, we're going to debate this topic, find some evidence, and then we'll debate up in front of the class, right? Those can be fun for some quick, little check-in aspects, maybe an activator, a summarizer, but if we really want to dive deeper into topics, this is a really good aspect. And I find that too, it will take like a full class period as well for them. Um, they aren't the Lincoln Douglas model. If you're thinking of a debate, they're not necessarily that, but they do run a little bit of a similar situation. So I have set up here for you if you're interested, and this will be linked in on our Padlet, but ideally, the position time. You have side A would present their position using supporting evidence from the text. Side B would restate side A's position to their satisfaction. Side B presents their position, supporting evidence from the text, and side A restates to side B's satisfaction. Then you would move on to that consensus building. You abandon roles, have a conversation about the initial statement and or question. What did you learn from one another? After hearing all the information, where may each of you individually stand? What do we agree on? What do we disagree on? And you could format those questions based on what kind of topic you were structuring. And then so I usually give my students graphic organizer with them, depending on the class level. I might have the students find their research points and say, show me three good sources, gather your evidence from them. I might provide the sources to them. I might provide the documents. Maybe I want to have a variety of things for students. So there's a lot of things that the instructor can do to scaffold it. So this is definitely something that can be adaptable no matter what types of learners are in your classroom. And then having like a little spot for them to jot down some of those topics where they can kind of go back and pull from where do they agree, where do they disagree, and can they get to that aspect of consensus building and kind of think about that process as a whole onto that particular topic. And there's so many topics that you can choose in civics, right? I mean, in this day and age, sometimes almost everything could be controversial, right? Teachinghistory.org also has a lovely outline of sort of what the SAC is, how it was developed, how you can use it. They gave one about Abraham Lincoln as an example. So again, if you're thinking about US history classes or a different type of class, maybe you also teach like a psychology elective and you want to talk about an experiment, whether it was risky or not. That would be a great aspect to do. Could definitely see this being used in economics, sociology, world studies, all sorts of different types of class structures. Can even go beyond the social sciences. One of the websites, I don't know if it's one of the ones I put on here that I was browsing through to organize, had a lot in environmental sciences with a lot of some of the crossover between some political topics and environmental science and biology and various different studies, climate change. That whole discussion was really good as well. The digital inquiry group also has a variety of different aspects. I do believe you have to have an account on this website to access them, but they have different ones on these topics. And then there's more from the discussion project as well, in terms of some ideas, the goals, steps to do so, various different ways to kind of get started with this. So a lot of different ways I think that are out there that you can find for this particular type of process. And there's a wealth of resources out there already created. If you are familiar and or enjoy some of the teacher sharing kind of websites like Teacher Pay Teachers, I'm sure there's a slew of SACs out there on various different topics. If you're, saying, I don't necessarily want to reinvent the wheel, let me see what else is out there for debating the Electoral College, or, you know, the minimum wage debate or things of that nature. I also have another past sample from myself, which happened to be on the Electoral College. I would have to update my sources on this one if needed. Um, but this is one that I did in my classes that I wanted to have it scaffolded, so I found some evidence for them to use. But if I were to do this debate in, say, AP Gov classes, I probably would have the students themselves find the evidence pieces, as opposed to providing them with some of those resources on their own. So lots of different resources out there. Those were some good ones I thought that had good ideas, some aspects of like already ready-made topics and different types of samples. And again, if you are just generally speaking interested in this topic as a whole, especially if you might be a little nervous and kind of bringing in some of these more controversial topics to encourage civil discourse in your classroom, I do think this is a really worthy book to have in your social studies toolkit. Okay. Feedback. Do students like this? Right. So I'm a believer in asking my students for feedback when, especially if I'm trying something new. I think it's a great time to get some of that feedback from them and share that energy and see what ways in which, their perspective, maybe it could go better or whatnot. Um, so I did have a couple excerpts I was able to find on some student surveys from a couple classes ago. For I did one structured on, um, I think the topic was hate speech. Should we regulate hate speech more, or something of that nature? I can't quite remember what the topic was, but I know in some of the feedback was generally all positive. I know there were a couple like negative pieces of feedback in the sense that sometimes if students are a little less apt to participate in these kind of activities where they have to talk out loud, they might not necessarily share as much. And if you have a conflict of interest there, you have a really talkative student that gets paired with a student that's a little bit more quiet, that can kind of create an odd dynamic. But sometimes we can't control those things either. But for the most part, I felt like it forced me to listen more carefully to the other side, especially living in the age of social media. We don't really talk about things or listen as much. We argue, which I thought was a really good point. I know I'm sure it's a constant topic in a lot of schools. We have a lot of students that sometimes don't know how to kind of discuss something, right? They know how to argue about it, dig their heels in, but they might not necessarily know how to discuss a topic or participate in active listening, which does require oftentimes to listen to something that we don't necessarily agree with and then be able to kind of formulate a response from there. Another piece of feedback, I was given a side I really didn't agree with, but doing the research on why that side exists, at least helped me understand there are multiple ways to view an issue. Sometimes students having them think outside the box, like, if you're debating Second Amendment access and you have a student that's very strongly for or against gun regulations, you give them the opposite viewpoint. That can kind of viewpoint change can force them to kind of think outside the box a little bit and challenge their own beliefs, but also maybe be like, all right, I still feel the same way, but at least I have a greater understanding on why there's a different type of opinion out there too on that topic. Then I did another one about minimum wage in an honors econ class. I never really have had to listen closely to my peers' responses and sum up what they said before and use it to decide where I stand on an issue. It slowed my thinking down, which is part of why I like this process. It was much more organized than just a regular debate. So some of the more quieter students that kind of have some thoughts in their head but don't necessarily want to participate in a full class debate kind of appreciate this type of approach as well. So I think it does have some ability to be useful in that sense, to get a little bit more participation across your class in sort of that active discussion piece for sure. Um, and slowing the thinking down too. I know when I had collected this data, I really liked that statement. I do use this as a time on task aspect. So I would have certain types of time structures timed in. I'd run a timer, and students would have to kind of adhere to some of that. There would certainly be times where I'd need to extend it a little bit for like one or two groups by a minute or so. Wouldn't necessarily throw the whole class off track. But that's also something that I think is really helpful about this structure is having that practice time on task as well and having that sort of format come into play. So again, they're really it's really just about structuring a way to talk about some of those hard-hitting issues, that are, of course, going to come up in our everyday classroom lives. And it's a great resource, and there's tons of information about it online, tons of examples, but you can definitely, certainly make your own, I think, on almost any topic. I could see this being used too at elementary level, on maybe some things that kind of tie into like group norms. I know we don't have a whole lot of time to hit on social studies and science topics so much anymore in our elementary schools, but we do have some integration happening, and I think this could be used if you pair students up and, you know, do something in some sort of different activity. In lower elementary, you could have like a silly little debate about, which character in the book was a, more challenging character, or who was the tougher character, or who was the most happy character, or something like that. I could see it being structured that way. In upper elementary, I think you could definitely use some of that integrative, keep the structure in place, but maybe it's a different integrative topic. Maybe it does tie into like some environmental science pieces or some like active citizenship aspects if you're talking about, how to cultural differences or something like that within your school, your society, or studying something of that nature. I could definitely see the structure being used for elementary level as well. Certainly in middle school topics, for sure. I think you could use this as well in your middle school environments. It's just going to look a little different and maybe have a little bit more scaffolding in there. And that is where I know I myself am here. Do we have any questions at all? I know this was a little quicker of an afternoon just because of the time. We are 2 days before Christmas break, so for our holiday break, and we are all ready for break, I'm sure. But um, did anybody have any questions? Okay. Well, with that being said, let's pop this up one more time. Again, if you want to access some of these resources, scan that QR code, or visit our Padlet resource, sign up for our newsletters. If you can't find ways to do that, please send me an email, rena.krupski@maine.gov. I do teach at Scarborough High School too, so if you forget that email, feel free to reach out at me from Scarborough High School, lovely Scarborough High School. And once again, the information shared today is a resource and not an endorsement by the Maine Department of Education. I hope everybody has a lovely break, and I hope you find some ways to enjoy kind of tackling some controversial issues in a more structured, organized, peaceful format in your room. Have a great afternoon, everyone.